I'm Dr. Thor Hanson, and today I'll be answering your questions from Twitter. This is more biology support. Texas Tessa asks, "Hey, #biology Twitter, if a person somehow found themselves in the stomach of a whale, how would they die? Would they be digested alive? Would they drown in stomach acid? Would they die from dehydration?" Well, any of those things would eventually do the person in. But what would probably get them first would be suffocation, because there's not enough oxygen and there's far too much carbon dioxide and other gases in the stomach of that whale for them to survive. @GloomParks asks, why do ticks and fleas and mosquitoes exist? Like, what do they offer? Can they die, please? Thanks. Well, ticks and fleas and mosquitoes may be annoying to us, but they provide a huge amount of food to all sorts of creatures in nature. The bats and the birds and the lizards and the turtles. And remember, of course, even that the mosquitoes have a larval phase where they're living in the water, and they are bountiful food to fishes and other things. So removing those annoyances from our lives, and removing them from the environment, would cause cascading effects through the food webs and probably eliminate a lot of other creatures of which we are much more fond. @SlumBuddha asks, what causes a cell to die? #biology, #question. Well, let me count the ways. Cells can die from trauma, they can die from disease, and certain cells are programmed to die at certain times in the lifespan of an organism, particularly during growth and development, and metamorphosis. So a tadpole turning into a frog no longer needs a tail, and those cells die off. Or a human embryo growing fingers must kill off the cells in between the fingers at the right time, or the hand will come out webbed. @AnnaMueller6 asks, why do evergreens stay green all winter? The evergreen strategy allows those trees to avoid expending all the energy it's required in springtime to grow a new set of leaves. They do lose their leaves, but they do it incrementally, bit by bit, so that there's always enough foliage on those trees to photosynthesize whenever conditions are right. @Swoosh61 asks, what is the most recent species to be confirmed extinct? Well, you include the word confirmed, which is very important, because there are no doubt many species going extinct right now that we simply do not have enough data on to say one way or another. But a recent confirmed extinction is one due to climate change. The first mammal species known to be lost to the climate crisis, the bramble key melomes, a mouse-like creature whose entire world, really, all of its habitat has now been inundated by rising sea levels on the islands where it was found off the coast of Australia. @DB Green Alliance asks, what is the effect of climate change on biodiversity? How is the extinction of biodiversity going to affect Homo sapiens as a species? There is an extinction crisis associated with climate change. We are seeing between 25 and 85% of the species on the planet adjusting their ranges in response to climate change. What's the point of biodiversity in the first place? I like to answer that in 3 ways, by using different sorts of cartoon characters. The first comes to us from Spider-Man, where the theme is, with great power comes great responsibility. So because our species has such power over ecosystems and other species, many people believe we have a responsibility to take care of them. The second example comes to us from The Sorcerer's Apprentice, where the Mickey Mouse character in Fantasia, the young apprentice, starts reading spells at random from the spell book and all hell breaks loose. When we allow biodiversity to go extinct, we don't know what we're messing with. And the third example comes to us from good old Scrooge McDuck, Donald Duck's rich uncle, who might ask about biodiversity, what's in it for me? Well, there's a lot in it for us as a species. We rely upon biodiversity to pollinate crops, to provide fisheries and forestry products. We rely upon biodiversity to provide many of our medicinals. And when we lose species without ever having even studied them, we don't know what we're missing. @MoArtStudio asks, humor me, what extinct animal do you wish was still around today? It's very difficult to choose, but I will choose the Shasta giant ground sloth, a big shambling beast that once lived in the Mojave Desert in the southwestern part of the United States. I choose it because it was the sole long-distance seed disperser for another species that I happen to really love, the Joshua tree, those giant yucca plants that exist only in that desert southwest landscape, and that are suffering now because they can't disperse their seeds far enough to keep up with the changes being incurred by global warming. So if I could bring that species back, I would not only get ground sloths, but I would also ensure the future of Joshua trees. At Eliza Bergman asks, Insect Armageddon. Decline of insects around the world. How are migratory insects going to fare in light of these environmental changes and declines? Well, let me answer that question with another question. When was the last time you had to wipe bug splatter off of your windshield? We've all experienced that drop-off in bug splatter on our windshields, and that gets at this question of insect Armageddon, which is being caused by a variety of factors, from climate change to pesticides to habitat loss to simply the way we manage large portions of land now in our rural areas. Where we used to have farms that were small and varied in crops, we are now very efficient in the way that we farm. We have farmed large areas with only one crop, reducing the quality of the habitat for a diversity of insects. In fact, migratory insects may be at even greater risk because they encounter numerous habitats along their journey, and they're particularly vulnerable to climate change, which is altering the timing of seasonal events so that it's possible an insect might arrive in a landscape expecting to feed but be too early or too late to encounter that critical source of food. Layla asks, a quick biology question, please, for something I'm writing. Do plantae, protista, monera, and fungi kingdoms need the animalia kingdom at all? I love your question because it really gets at the interconnectedness of nature. Yes, we divide all living things into these 5 kingdoms. The plants are the plantae, of course, things like amoebas and slime molds, and the protists, the monera, which describes the bacteria, the fungi, which include the familiar mushrooms and so forth, and of course the animals, which is all the rest of us. But if you imagine how these things are related, you start to see ecology in action. Imagine the plants, for example, without the insects to pollinate them. Or try to imagine all of the bacteria that live even within our own bodies, that rely upon animals for a habitat, if you will. And fungi are turning up everywhere. Now that we have the ability to study them through their DNA, we can find fungi living inside of plant leaves and tissues where we never imagined them before. @BayouPhilosophy asks, sorry for a dumb #biology question, the relationship between genotype and phenotype is causal, right? Like the genotype, together with the environment, causes a certain phenotype. The answer is yes. The genotype, the genetic makeup of the organism, causes the phenotype, the physical expression of that genotype. But it's not just like reading a script. And that's because the genotype responds to cues from the environment, whether it's temperature or the availability of food or other cues during the development of that organism, so that it's possible for a genotype to express quite different phenotypes depending on the conditions the organism is living in. And one fascinating example of that comes to us from the Gulf of California in Mexico, where the Humboldt squid, which once grew in that region to 5 or even 6 feet in length, responded to climate-driven warming of the water with a different phenotype. Same genotype, triggering a different physical manifestation at a much smaller size. The mature squid now rarely exceed a foot in length. @ComixMill asks, question for #biology Twitter. Why do birds know to get out of the way of oncoming cars, but mammals seemingly do not? #deer, #headlights. Well, the answer is birds don't know how to get out of the way of oncoming cars. And in fact, birds make up a considerable portion of the estimated 1 million vertebrate animals that are killed on roads in North America every single day. including nocturnal birds like barn owls, which fly low over the roads and often hunt along the margins of roads and are particularly vulnerable to being struck by cars. Ido Vrieker asks, question for biologists/biophysicists. During a break, we found this mutated daisy outside. To me, this seems like a beneficial form of the daisy. Larger flower, larger chance of pollination. Why did a smaller flower and not this mutation become the standard form of the flower? What you have discovered is an example of what botanists would call fasciation, which is a change in the growing tissues of the plant that cause that sort of a deformity. And it can be triggered by an infection, it can be triggered by damage to the tissues, but the reason that it won't be passed down, the reason that you won't see a lot of daisies looking like that, becoming the dominant form for daisies, is that it is not inherited from one generation to the next. You get the occasional daisy with that sort of growth form, but it's not passed down. @FuturesGate asks, what's the oldest tree in existence? What's the oldest tree ever recorded? Well, the oldest individual trees are certain bristlecone pines in California and Patagonian cypresses that have been known to live for 5,000 years. But there are also clonal trees, things like certain aspens or oaks, where they are genetic clones of one another living in a grove. So while individual trunks may die off, the whole organism can live for tens of thousands of years. @Ekarizmi asks, okay, random thought, are tomatoes really fruits? Then ketchup would be smoothies, right? The answer is yes, tomatoes are fruits, and we know this because tomatoes have seeds. And fruits evolved for the sole purpose of luring animal dispersers, like us, into moving fruits away from the parent plant to a new location where those seeds might sprout and grow. So if you are in the produce aisle and you see something that has seeds, whether it is a green pepper or a zucchini or a squash, you know that it must be a fruit. So those are all the questions that we have for today. A wonderful mixture of topics. Thank you for watching more Biology Support.